Anyone who wants to become a minister must wrestle with the question, what or who calls me to ministry? Here's what happened to me. My employer, North Star Computers, was dying a slow death, trying to compete with IBM and Apple in 1985. A loyal employee. I should have jumped ship, the sinking ship, much earlier with all the other rats. When I finally was ready to leave, I interviewed for and got a fantastic job offer working for Hewlett-Packard as a test engineer in Santa Rosa, California. This was my dream job. My dream job when I worked as an electronic technician for Hewlett-Packard. When I returned to finish my engineering degree at UC Berkeley in the fall of 1979, I had dreamed of getting this kind of position. But something held me back from accepting it. What? I kept asking over and over why I felt I couldn't quite say yes to the offer. Returning home from a dream analysis group that I was in, led by a UU minister, Jeremy Taylor, cruising along in my little Honda Civic, high up on a freeway exchange that turned from going towards Oakland and looked down over Berkeley, and singing a sacred, joyful chant, I suddenly knew why I was feeling held back. I suddenly recognized the call to ministry welling up within me. I was sure attending Star King School for the Ministry, located in Berkeley, was the next step to respond to that calling. It felt inwardly like solving a complicated problem with an elegant solution emerging with perfect clarity. So I experienced a moment of clarity. But what was the source? Did God send me a sign that this was the time I should start on the path to ministry? Or did my recognition come from some other source? As a boy, I remember standing in our Unitarian Fellowship's pulpit, pretending to preach a sermon to the empty chairs. Unknown to me at the time, my father had contemplated UU ministry at one point in his life. He's a professor of physical chemistry. I'd been inspired by the ministry of the Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs, who served the First Unitarian Church of Oakland, where I was a member, in California. Doing dream work with Jeremy Taylor had opened up my heart. Was the source maybe a synthesis of these different experiences? Most seminarians wrestle with this question long after the decision to enter seminary. Actually, anyone making a big life-changing decision has really the same listening problem. How does one decide to get married, to have a child? How does one decide which college to attend or job to pursue or accept? What moves us to believe or disbelieve? And is there a way to develop a trustworthy inner guidance in making those decisions? One way that I've been reading about is to put a cup of coffee in front of an empty chair across a table and have a conversation with God. Tanya Lorman, who, by the way, grew up a Unitarian Universalist, described this practice in her book, When God Talks Back. That was the source of the reading this morning. The idea from evangelical Christian churches, basically, is using the imagination as a way to open a door to God, so God can talk back conversationally, answer questions, and give advice. With training and practice, many evangelicals report the experience of receiving divine messages and direction. I was rather skeptical as I read the testimonies she reports in the book. I tremble at the idea of inviting a conversation like that. What if? What if God shows up and tells me to take my son up to Mount Greylock in the Berkshires, not far from where my home is in East Greenbush, and sacrifice him, like God did in the story of Abraham and Isaac? What if I'm hiking in the Adirondacks and come upon a burning bush that talks to me and directs me to do something that sounds impossible? What if God tells me to sell all my possessions, become a homeless wanderer who loves and serves the way Jesus did? The evangelical vision of a relationship with God is far more benign than this. The God that they imagine is one of unconditional love and acceptance. This God walks with you and talks with you. This God answers every prayer. This God is an intimate companion who never leaves your side. This God is the ultimate BFF, best friend forever. My question of this imagined relationship is, of course, is it real? Is our imagination a legitimate way to have a conversation with God? In our history, the transcendentalists might have said yes, but they would have used the word intuition rather than imagination. Historically, one of the sources evangelicals are tapping, although indirectly, is the transcendentalists. In the American democratization of religion, instead of an exclusive privilege of priests and ministers, the transcendentalists felt anyone could have a direct experience of the divine through this intuitive channel. Transcendentalism offended the original 19th century American Unitarians, trying to create a biblically based, rational Christianity. They leaned toward deism that claimed a creator God, but not a relational God that could interact with people. In the 20th century, it continued and continues today to offend the humanists in our movement, seeking to create a reasoned religious tradition free from the supernatural. There is quite a range of experience and belief within our movement and this congregation here today about the existence and non-existence of God and our ability or lack of it to be in direct contact with God. As someone who embraces the core teachings of Buddhism that remain neutral about the existence and non-existence of God, I don't think believing or not believing in God is critical to living a good life. What is of supreme importance, though, is how we listen and how we respond. I don't care if you are a biblical literalist or a militant atheist. Both have the same problem when a meaningful message of unusual power and clarity enters their consciousness. Both must figure out whether the emotionally intoxicating message comes from a reliable, trustworthy source. For the true believer, was the source God or maybe the devil? For the atheist, was the source a delusional detour or mental fabrication, or inspired synthesis of timeless wisdom? Both must evaluate the truth value of the message, and both must decide whether to act on this message or let it go. I found reflecting on the tests in the reading of the evangelicals that they apply to these messages quite useful, and would like to now translate them a little bit for our Unitarian Universalist ears. I hope you'll find these translations helpful as you hear potentially life-changing, meaningful messages. So, test number 1, the voice test. Do I recognize the voice of this message? Having internalized all kinds of messages from parents, teachers, partners, children, sisters, brothers, friends, etc., we hear echoes of those voices in our heads. And there is a familiar ring to our own ego's voice, maybe a synthesis of some of these voices. While an inspired message could come through one of those voices, odds are against it. The evangelicals say the voice of God will not be familiar to us. For I'd expand this to any unfamiliar voice we don't recognize as a clue to the message's significance. Test number 2, the wisdom test. Is there wisdom, insight, or compassion in the message? Foolish messages like telling me that I can fly because I'm exempt from the law of gravity are unlikely to contain a lot of wisdom, though with drone technology today, that might be changing. The evangelicals test the message to see if it is biblical. Could be more expansive. Does the message contradict what we know about science? Could it come from the mouth of a great sage or philosopher? What about another religious tradition? Islam, Judaism, Taoism. Test number 3, the community test. What do other wise and learned people in our community think about that message? Even if the message is novel, witnessing other person's responses can be very informative. Sometimes a message might be a leading edge phenomenon, synchronous with other people's inspiration. And finally, test number 4, the emotional test. Does receiving a message bring a sense of peace and comfort? Does it open up and expand the heart? Does it bring more love into the world? The voice, wisdom, community, and emotional tests are all ways to validate inspired, meaningful messages before deciding what to do about them. When I felt the call to ministry, it certainly passed the emotional test and the voice test right away. I then tested it with my minister, my parents, and others who knew me well, listening carefully to their response. Did they see a minister growing in me? Did I have something to offer Unitarian Universalism? And finally, was this a wise choice for how I could use my life in the service of others? Passed all those tests, here I am. And sometimes the inner messages aren't clear, or there is not enough information. Illustrated in this story, a man named David claimed all of his prayers were answered by God. He lived in a house by a river. A big storm was coming. A friend drove over to his house, knocked on the door, and suggested he evacuate ahead of the storm. Gather your valuables, put them in the back of my car, and let's leave together. David laughed, saying, God will take care of me and answer my prayers. The storm came up, torrents of rain came down, and soon the river overflowed its banks. David calmly got out his prayer book and prayed fervently for salvation from the storm. The water started to fill the first floor of his house, and he went upstairs to the second floor and prayed even harder to be saved from the storm. Soon a boat came by, and the captain offered to help him escape the rising floodwaters. Again, David refused, saying he had complete confidence in the power of prayer to save him from that flood. The water rose up to the second floor. So David climbed up on the roof of the house, and he decided to stop praying in English and started praying in Sanskrit. Then he did Hebrew and Arabic to cover all of his bases. A helicopter pilot spotted him and hovered over the house and dropped a ladder for him to climb up. David again laughed and refused, saying he had supreme confidence God would save him from the flood. The water kept rising, and now it was up to his neck. David just prayed harder and louder. I'm sad to say the floodwaters overcame him, and he drowned. David next found himself in heaven and had the opportunity to meet God face to face. David was, of course, grateful, but was also distressed at drowning. What happened, God? He said. Why didn't you answer my prayers? God looked a little perplexed and answered, why, I sent you a car, a boat, and a helicopter. Those inspired messages may appear inside our minds, but they also may come to us from the outside too. I listen very attentively to the voices in our congregation for those messages. I owe much of my growth and development as a minister over almost 40 years of ministry to what I have learned, what I have heard, and how I've responded. And sometimes I hear something that inspires something big to happen. In the spring of 2004, I visited New Paltz, where two UU ministers were doing same-sex marriages. Maybe some of you will remember. And they had been arrested. I came back wondering if there might be some way our congregation could support them in what they were doing. A television reporter showed up on Sunday morning about that same time, and they asked the members of the congregation how they felt about same-sex marriage. The reporter was surprised to find that no one opposed it. In that moment, I heard a powerful message that the congregation was ready and willing to stand up for marriage equality. I decided to defy the law by marrying 2 women and 2 men in a public ceremony in the Albany UU sanctuary. That marriage ceremony made the front page of the Sunday paper. Those marriages galvanized the congregation's advocacy for marriage equality in a way they look back on today with pride. So whether a message comes to you inside your head or through the others around you, listen carefully. Then apply that voice, wisdom, community, and emotional tests to what you hear. If it passes those tests, consider seriously letting it guide your actions. But don't stop there. Keep listening. Keep responding. We are part of an interdependent web of existence. None of us is an island. None of us is God. Where charity and love abound, God is there, and the Spirit of life and love are present. So be it.